Well, hello everyone. I am so happy to be back here on Oh Yum, doing a live stream for you. I hope everyone is doing well and has had some delicious bakes in the oven over the last few weeks. And I have to say, this kitchen smells delicious. I'm about to make my chewy chocolate molasses cookies. And before I get into the recipe, you know I have to say my hellos. First of all, Esme and Lori, hello. I know you're watching, and so is Gigi and Michino. And I'll say hi to Kathy and to Suzanne. I saw you're watching, and I see names popping up all over the place. It's great to see you, and I see some are even baking along with me. So before I get into the recipe, I've got a tray of the cookie dough scooped, rolled in granulated sugar, and I'm gonna pop these in the oven so you can see real time how these cookies come out of the oven, and then you know exactly what to expect. So let me pop these right in. My oven's preheated to 350. And I'll set the timer for 10 minutes. These cookies take between 10 and 12 minutes, so I'll check at the 10-minute mark. And just as a recap, these are my chewy chocolate ginger molasses cookies. And it's like a molasses cookie. I don't want to say for grown-ups because it's not like it has brandy or anything in, but it's intensely flavored. Big ginger, big dark chocolate flavor, and of course you've got the strength of the molasses at the same time to give these punch. What I love is they are easy to mix. If you've made chocolate chip cookies, you can make these cookies. So I'm starting with my dark brown sugar. If you can use Demerara sugar, which has a nice coarse grain and a moisture to it. Can you use light brown sugar in place of dark brown? Of course. I'm just going for every opportunity to intensify the flavor. And I see people writing from all over the place. A tip for baking cookies, Angel, preheat your oven, definitely. It's amazing what a big difference. If your oven doesn't have at least 15 minutes to preheat, what difference that can make in the end result of your cookies. In addition to the dark brown sugar, I'm going to add my fancy molasses. Now, typically in grocery stores in North America, you can buy two types of molasses, fancy and blackstrap. Fancy is milder and less bitter. Blackstrap is so intense, it would actually make these cookies unpalatable. And you can buy, a lot of the major brands of molasses are unsulfured molasses, so you get a nice, clean, sweet taste from it. And if I can answer a question that I know I'm gonna see popping up here is, because molasses is a common North American ingredient, if you're joining me from other countries around the world, you may not have access to molasses. You can use honey in place of molasses. It's got a similar texture, it lacks the bitterness, and it is a bit sweeter. So I would pull back on your measurement. So where this recipe calls for 87 grams of molasses, pull it back to more like 75, 80 if you're using honey. Another option is to measure that same amount of brown sugar, but you need to add a little moisture to it. So you're adding more brown sugar to the recipe. Add a tablespoon of warm water to liquefy that brown sugar. That will add more moisture to your cookie recipe. I've already melted my butter. So unlike some chocolate chip cookie recipes, mine included, that you start by creaming your butter and sugar together, I melt my butter and then I let it cool just a little bit. So this is still warm, but it's not hot off the stove. And I'll give this a little whisk just to combine everything. The sugar won't dissolve into the butter, not until I start adding the other ingredients. And I see greetings from everywhere. Oh, we've got Bada Bing back from Staten Island. That is awesome. And Manuel, you've been watching since the sugar days. That was a little while ago. And I've noticed sweater sets are back. I think sugar, I started taping in 2002. I was wearing a lot of outfits like this, and they are back in fashion. This is not from 2 decades ago. All right, now that I've got my melted butter, sugar, and molasses stirred up, I'm going to add ginger. So I really like to give these cookies a great intensity of ginger. So I use a combination of both fresh and dried ginger in my cookie recipe. So I'm gonna grate about a tablespoon. Basically, if you cut an inch or 2.5 centimeter cube of fresh ginger and grate that in, that is plenty. This takes a little while with these graters, but I like it because you get all the juice and the pulp, but not those threads in your cookies. Oh, I love seeing all these notes from people coming in as I'm grating my ginger. Oh, the ginger smells so good with the molasses before, oh wait, I'm probably smelling the ones in the oven, aren't I? Genius. All right, it's been a while since I've done the live streams. Oh, Bonnie, I forgot to say hi. You'll be getting some of these cookies very, very soon, won't you? Now, just as a note, this cookie dough recipe, because I melt the butter, I like to chill the dough after it's fully mixed. So make sure you plan that bit of time into your cookie making preparations. I say 2 hours in the recipe is ideal. If you cheat a little bit or maybe pop them in the freezer and let them go for 45 minutes to an hour, then you can get them in the oven. But the idea is I don't want the cookies to be too flat. If I bake them right after mixing the dough, the cookies come out too flat. I want these to have a little bit of structure to them. Okay, that is definitely the fresh ginger I smell. And I'll break in my single egg at the same time. And this recipe does relate very closely to a traditional ginger molasses cookie that is very, very chewy. And so if you don't want to add any chocolate element, you can simply leave it out. And the cocoa powder that I add to the batter itself, replace with all-purpose flour, leave out the chocolate chips, and you will end up with that classic flat, chewy ginger molasses cookie. So now that this is all combined, again, I'm done with my whisk. I knew I'd end up with molasses everywhere. Now I'll grab my sifter, and I'm going to sift my dry ingredients in. And I know we've had this conversation before. Sift, not sift. Most of my recipes I call for sifting because it's a good habit. Good habits aren't something we always follow, but whenever I work with icing sugar or cocoa powder in a batter or mixture, I always sift. So I'll start with my all-purpose flour. And now I've got my cocoa powder, and the reason I call for Dutch process as ideal is not because of any chemical reaction with other ingredients. If you see Dutch process cocoa powder called for in a cake recipe, you need to use it because Dutch process cocoa powder has had its acidity removed from it, so it reacts differently with your baking powder and baking soda in a cake, and it can really change the way your cake bakes. It may dome, not dome. It also intensifies the color and makes the flavor a little more robust but also milder at the same time, so you get more of a chocolatey punch from your cocoa powder. So that's why I do prefer it in this cookie recipe. Is it essential? Will the cookies be ruined if you're just using conventional cocoa powder? Not at all. I am adding baking soda and some fine salt and my spices, a combination of cinnamon, and this is where I add the addition of a teaspoon of ground ginger. So you've got the fresh ginger for that sort of real front of the mouth pop when you bite into the cookies. It kind of cuts the sweetness of the cookie, but then you've got that warmth of the ground ginger with the cinnamon in the back. And because I don't want my sifter dropping into my bowl, I'm gonna add my little bit of nutmeg in a moment. Get that out of the way. So I've got whole nutmeg. You could simply measure it. If you've got it pre-ground, and I'll grind it. I've just got a little dry spot on my zester here. I'm looking for about half a teaspoon. Now I should let you know, I first came up with this recipe. It was just one of those moments in time. You know when you eat something delicious and that memory sticks with you for so long? Well, one time I was working in Toronto. I was caught in between place A and place B. I'd been walking a lot. I was famished. And I knew I needed a coffee, so I walked into a coffee shop and they were baking these cookies off. This combination, the smell of the chocolate baking with the ginger was driving me crazy. And I know I was really hungry, but it was such a fulfilling cookie that I went on a quest to recreate that recipe. I don't even remember the name of the coffee shop, honestly, but the cookie and its memory lives on in this recipe for you, so I do hope you enjoy it. I'm just gonna take a peek at the oven. Oh, look at that, just under a minute. I'm gonna stir carefully here just so I don't end up with cocoa powder all over the new sweater set. And Heidi's asking, actually I saw two questions. Lori, I think it was, asked about using black cocoa in place of regular or Dutch process here. Black cocoa is a bit of a tricky ingredient. It has a lower fat content. In fact, one of the lowest fat contents in the family of cocoa powder. And so it behaves very differently in your baking. I know we think of cocoa powder as dry, so we don't think of it as having a fat content, but it does. And so this is where the black cocoa, I don't even know how they treat it to make it that intense. But I find it ends up making my baked goods a bit drier or more crumbly. So you have to be aware of that and compensate with adding a little extra fat. And then Heidi, you were asking about, no, you're not a fan of ginger. You can eliminate from this recipe. I would add an extra half a teaspoon of cinnamon, just so you get a nice robust flavor, but you can eliminate the ginger. I just want to show you these cookies at the 10-minute mark. So here they are. They're starting to get a bit of a crinkle and crackle, and you can use a spatula, obviously, to touch it. I'm just going to use my tough baker's fingers here, and I can feel it's very soft on the sides. These cookies are very soft even when they're completely baked, but these need another 2 minutes just because I want them to kind of collapse and spread a little bit more. So 2 more minutes. And just as a tip, you saw me pull those cookies from the oven and show them to you. It doesn't compromise the end cookie. If that was an angel food cake, that's a different story. But something like a cookie, if you pull it out and let it cool and you find they're not done enough, you can pop them back in the oven for a minute or 2. Try not to let them cool completely, because then your ingredients like your baking soda, they've done their business, they're done. But if they're still quite warm and you realize you want to pop them back in, just go ahead and do it. So chat as I stir away here. Katie's asking, I love getting these questions, can I make them gluten-free? I think this recipe would adapt very, very well to gluten-free baking. Cocoa holds a lot of moisture to it. You've got a lot of butter in this recipe, plus the molasses this is a fun term, it's hygroscopic. That means not hydro, it sounds like it should be hydro, but the word is actually hygroscopic. It holds moisture to itself, and that's why the molasses cookies are always so moist in the center and so super chewy. And so to use your favorite gluten-free baking blend in place of the all-purpose flour would be absolutely fine. Okay, the last addition, because I really want to amp up that chocolate intensity, is some chocolate chips. Now, I like using couverture. These are baking chips. So if you wanted to use couverture blocks of chocolate and chop it and add chocolate chunks, and I like using the dark chocolate. Like I said, I want the intensity of chocolate in this cookie. If you want something on the milder side, of course, milk chocolate chips or milk chocolate chunks would work just fine. Or you could leave them out, but I find the chips give the cookie a little bit of body, so it's just not like your everyday molasses cookie. And now I'll stir those in to make sure they're fully combined. Oh, and there's the 2-minute mark. I'll just bring those cookies over to show you. And it is my habit, whenever I do a drop cookie, a scooped cookie like this, I like to give the pan a little smack. Not critical to the recipe like my oatmeal, but and I love how they sink in. You got a nice little crackle. I can smell the chocolate. So you can imagine the chewiness of a molasses cookie, but yet that density like a chocolate brownie, That's what this cookie is like. It's like molasses cookie meets perfect chocolate brownie. So I'm gonna set these aside to cool. Are you chuckling, Michael? Because I'm a little bit excited about these cookies. I'm so happy to have so many batches on hand. So as I mentioned, speaking of, if I were to try and scoop these cookies now, you can see the batter's quite soft. So first off, it would be very difficult and very, very messy to work with, but the cookies would bake far too flat. So what I like to do is chill these, and Michael, if I could get your help. I would excitedly made another batch of cookies. Thank you. Now this is the half recipe because I baked a dozen cookies off. So if you're wondering, oh, the batter shrinks when it chills? No, it doesn't. Of course not. And I've got some granulated sugar here. There we go. Ah, Danielle from Grimsby bought a copy of Baking Wisdom. That's my latest cookbook. If you're interested, you can find it at your favorite booksellers in-store or online. And so I'm just using a small portion scoop. This is about just over 2 tablespoons, 2.5 tablespoons. But you can use 2 scoops. And if I want to make these cookies ahead and freeze them, what I do is I chill the dough just for a couple hours, just until they're easy to scoop. And then I portion them and I freeze them like this. So I don't do anything else. I pack these into a container and then you can pull them out, thaw them, and then roll them in sugar when it's time to bake them. So while I scoop and roll in granulated sugar, and if you're doing regular molasses cookies, just to recap, if you want to take this chewy chocolate ginger molasses cookie recipe and take the chocolate out, replace the cocoa powder measurement with the same amount of flour and leave the chocolate chips out, and you've got a delicious molasses cookie. Oh, sorry, my voice is cutting out. I hope that's not a universal problem. Sorry to hear that, Hansa. Oh, Cherry, there you are. Nice to see you signing in. And Ira is asking a great question about the difference between using melted butter or brown butter, the two are a little different, versus softened butter in recipes. It really comes down to a combination of the way it bakes and the texture of the end cookie. So the brown butter obviously adds a toastiness and a nuttiness to it. It also slightly concentrates the fat content because some of the milk solids will evaporate when you're browning the butter in the pan, where if you were using softened butter, it would end up in, or regular melted butter, it would end up in the cookie batter itself. So that's one difference. Melted butter, it's a matter of how those ingredients meld when they bake. So I find, just like this recipe, if I'm making chocolate chip cookies with melted butter instead of softened butter, I find they bake up really flat. And so letting the dough, there's really a common appreciation to letting cookie doughs chill for a little bit before you bake them, all types. And so I find using melted butter and chilling the dough has absolutely no difference to a recipe versus starting with room temperature unsalted butter and then not chilling the dough. The actual thickness of the cookie is the same. So if it's easier to mix using the melted butter, then I say go for it. Ooh, Tammy, I love your idea of adding candied ginger. If you really are a ginger fan, then you've got the fresh and the dried and the candied. Oh, this would absolutely sparkle. And if you really want to add a little more heat, how about a 1/4 teaspoon of ground black pepper when you're adding your spices? That would really take it to the next level. Okay, and oh, Rob is our awesome channel manager, that he has fixed some of the video choppiness. So hopefully that's helping along, but I am almost wrapping up here. So don't go away because you wanna see these cookies. Let me just finish. I can't leave a tray unfinished here. And I've got my full bowl of granulated sugar here. When you're done rolling your cookies in it, just sift out the cookie crumbs, and that way you can use your sugar again. Now I don't put this back in my big sugar canister because it has come in contact with some fat, and I don't want anything to spoil, but also if I were to use the same sugar to whip a meringue, it could compromise the meringue. But sift out the raw cookie bits, and then you can just keep the sugar to use for another use. All right, now this batch of cookies is ready for the oven. So I've had 3 trays in total go into the oven so far, and I have a new batch of dough, still have dough to left. The temptation with a cookie like this is to flatten it, but I try and avoid to do that because I find, again, it spreads too much. So I just let this go in the oven. It's preheated to 350. It bakes for 10 to 12 minutes, and you want to cool them on the tray. And these now should be about done. Let me set my timer. 10 minutes. Grab a lifter, make sure, oh yes, of course I have a little chocolate on my hands. I'm just checking out the questions here. Neri is saying, yes, it reminds her of crinkles a little bit. And it does have that chocolate crinkle vibe. With the granulated sugar on the outside, you get a really nice crunch to these cookies. I'm gonna keep this tray on the rack. They're still a little bit warm, but I have a platter already baked. And as you can see, they look exactly like the picture that is on the thumbnail. So remember, you can go back to this recipe, watch it again. The full recipe, I always include the full recipe below every video, so you know what to look forward to. And in addition to another live stream, same time next week, I have a new series that has just started launching on the channel, and we have a new episode that drops this Thursday. So every other Thursday, we've got a recipe from my new series called Anna's Spring Favorites. So gearing up to the warm weather, colorful, lighter textured, but of course with lots of tips and techniques, recipes that you can count on. And I'm excited to say that Thursday's recipe for Spring Favorites, cannelé from Bordeaux. So this is a classic French preparation. Not complicated, but it's all in the details. And I know you can make it, just like I know you can make these cookies. They're just starting to set now. Oh, and I didn't complete my thought, did I, about why I like to use couverture chocolate chips in my cookies. That's because couverture chocolate, unlike the chocolate chips you buy in a bag, which are designed to set and hold their shape when they bake, and then they solidify quite quickly. Couverture chocolate, once it becomes melted into something like a cake or a cookie batter, stays soft. So the chocolate chips stay fluid for hours, but even when they set up after a day, they're a lot softer than that snap of a tempered chocolate bar. That is quite a mass of cookies that Bonnie down the street is about to get. I'm waiting for her to post with clapping hands any second. She knows they are coming. Oh, Ira, another good question. Kathy, I love your enthusiasm. Parchment paper versus Silpat. I do use both. I find I use parchment paper more often simply because it's easier, and I do reuse my parchment paper until I put something that will flavor compromise. So say I bake something savory or I put nuts on it and I don't want another recipe to come in contact with it. So I reuse my parchment paper 3-4 times. But Silpats you can use, of course, hundreds of times. You will find that they start the Silpat surface starts browning after a lot of usage, but it's really best for recipes that are super sugary. If you're making something like a Florentine or something very precise like a macaron, you want to use that silicone coated mat. Oh, I'm so glad everyone thinks they're fantastic. Okay, I'm salivating now. You can see the melted chocolate in there. This one is still very warm, so it's in that brownie-like state. But once they set up, they get, because of the granulated sugar, they get a nice crunch to the outside, and they keep that crunch on the surface. And I saw a note pop up, well, could you roll these in icing sugar? I suspect with the moisture of this batter, if you were to roll these in icing sugar, that the cookie dough would absorb the icing sugar, and so you would lose its value. I think granulated sugar is the way to go. I do have a fabulous crinkle cookie recipe, though, right here on the OEM channel, so you can really check it out. And oh my, it's on Oh Yum. That's so fun. Was asking if this is in Baking Wisdom. No, this actually was in, I believe, in Baking Day, if I have that correct. It's been such a staple. It was quite a few years ago that I played with this recipe. And as my family will attest to, it is a regular in our house. It is one of my favorite recipes. Second, maybe only to the chocolate chip cookie. So I love that everybody has offered such great words. I will be here same time next week with another live stream. You've got an episode of Spring Favorites dropping on Thursday at 9 a.m. Eastern. Next week, do you want to know what I'm making? I'm going to wait and see if anyone responds. No one's responding. Should it be a secret? No, I'll tell you. So because you've stayed to the end of the video, you get to know that I will be making a Dutch baby next week, live. We're gonna make it and then bake it, and I'm going to make a bonus strawberry rhubarb compote while we're letting that Dutch baby bake. That is something perfect. Even though this is a live stream, not part of Spring Favorites, it's a springtime kind of recipe. So I'll see everyone in a week, and it's so nice to be back. Cheers, everyone. Enjoy baking these cookies. I knew once I took a bite, I got chocolate everywhere. The ginger.